Not for the first time, we're going to be talking to Dr. Cory Koedel, both Show Me Institute and Mizzou. Thanks for coming on once again.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. You and I sort of slogged through the legislative session together with other folks week by week. I am not the first person to say that it's like Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown, where every year I'm a little optimistic that something's going to really happen and things are just looking good early in the session, and then it seems to fall apart. What do you think happened this year in particular? What's your
Well,
take?
I agree with you. I was optimistic going in. I think the governor set a great tone, and before we start talking about all the negatives, because ultimately I think it was the dud. I think the A to F letter grade executive order was a really good thing, and
Can you
I don't.
explain what that is?
Yeah, so the governor in January issued an executive order that is going to require the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to give A to F letter grades to all schools and districts. This is something a lot of successful states do. We've written before here at the Show Me Institute about how the report cards that DESE puts out, it's just kind of a number dump. There's no use. It's hard to learn anything from them. People don't understand what the report cards mean, and they're effectively useless. And this is going to end that. There's going to be good, transparent information about school performance in a way that everyone understands what it means. And the executive order lays out that it's the information to be used is based on student achievement. So that was a really great thing.
But it kind of threw a rock in the pond, right? It did for me anyway, which is to say, like, I didn't know that this was going to happen. I'm guessing that some folks at DESE at some point, either before it happened or when it happened, were a little taken aback that they had this now huge item on their to do list. And then, ironically, or I don't know, maybe this made sense to everybody else, the legislature decided to take up A to F letter grades. And I felt like that took a lot of their attention.
Well, I think there's some sense to that, right? They were following the leadership of the governor, and an executive order is not permanent thing. It can be rescinded by the next governor, and if there is momentum behind this to codify the executive order and legislation, I was supportive of that. I think it ultimately this is where the negative comes in, where ultimately the legislature just could not get anything done this session. There was this issue, and the other big thing that had a lot of momentum was literacy policy, and that also failed. So the legislature just couldn't get out of its own way. But we still have the executive order, and that's an important thing this year.
And when you say the literacy policy, just tell folks what that is.
Yeah, sure. So, there is growing recognition. There's the test scores in the country have been pretty bad, and there's a handful of states that are bucking the trend, and there's a small handful of things that those handful of states are doing that seem to be important. And one of these things is based on literacy. It's teaching literacy the right way, which means using phonics instead of this thing called three cueing that encourages kids to guess at the words and has been debunked. So focus on phonics. And then the other thing is demand that kids can read by the end of the third grade. And what that means is you give them a literacy focused assessment that is designed to figure out if they can read. And if they can't, you retain them in the third grade. And so we had some literacy legislation that had those elements in it. Um, and there was a lot of support for it in Jefferson City, but ultimately it could not get done.
And then one thing that is happening from legislation a year or so ago is, in addition to St. Louis and Kansas City, basically, Boone County in the middle of the state where Columbia is, where you live, was written basically into a law that Boone County could get charter schools sponsored by something other than the local school board, which has to be the sponsor everywhere else in the state. Um, there is at least one charter school opening in Boone County and another one trying to open. I mean, one that's been approved by the state board, and then that seemed to come into play at the end of the session, right?
Are you referring to the stance by a senator that essentially any education legislation would have to come with a repeal on the rule that allows charter schools in Boone County? Yeah, no, I think
Yeah, like one senator derailed all kinds of things. Reading, Ada, I mean, does that surprise you? Like one senator can throw off the whole thing.
well, and this is an area where I'm not political expert. I don't pretend to be. I'm learning on the job, but um, I I mean, it sounds like that we have this really strong filibuster rule in the Senate that allows this. As someone who doesn't like a big government as a general principle, I don't mind that it's hard for our government to get stuff done, but it is very frustrating when there's this policy. I'd say literacy in particular. I mean, there's a few people are against it, but there's overwhelming support for this policy. I mean, everyone wants our kids to read. Anyone who looks at the data can see how bad it is. Um, and then, a small handful, even a single person can just derail the whole thing. Yes, it's very
That's
frustrating.
crazy. But there are things happening outside of the Missouri state legislature in Jefferson City that give us some opportunities via the executive branch. So then just bring us up to speed on what's happened over at DESE.
Well, so there's a lot of turmoil at DESE right now. The commissioner of education resigned last month, as well as her, one of the number two people there. Um,
Do we have any idea why?
uh, I don't,
Frustration or
I don't, uh, I don't want to be speculative about things I'm not sure about, but I will say there is a recording of a highly contentious meeting with the school board the month before the resignation occurred, and that would be quite a coincidence. I do think we have, as you know, we have essentially at this point almost an entirely new school board
hmm
since the governor came in, with the governor appointing a bunch of people, and they're behaving very differently than the school board has behaved in the past. Which for me, I feel bad for the folks. Change is always hard, and it's hard for individuals involved with it, but things have not been going well in our schools in Missouri, and so I think the change is needed, and the school board is pushing for it.
yeah, they're much more activists than they've been in the past. They're not activists, but the I mean, if I was going to go out on a limb, the prior school boards uh, they changed by one or two few people here and there, but they were kind of a rubber stamp to what DESE did,
Yeah,
and they didn't really push back
yeah, I wouldn't use the term activist. I think isn't right. It's a rubber stamp versus like
yet.
you know
Existing.
a genuine holding DESE to
Yeah.
task on the things that DESE is supposed to be doing. I think that's to me what I see as different.
So I interrupted you. You said the commissioner resigned, and
And
uh,
what I viewed as like kind of the second in command, she stepped down as well, and the school board president, who had been on the school board for a long time, also resigned. So uh, we're going to have entirely new leadership at the top for state education policy.
how do you recommend that the board of education go about finding somebody to replace the commissioner and deputy commissioner?
Well, I think so. We've talked about this a little bit. I think a national search is important. I think Missouri is since I've been here, been pretty comfortable just promoting from within and kind of just keeping things as they are. I do think we need real change. So we need to be looking for someone who, and to me, the biggest quality this person would have is they would be aspirational. I don't think we've had aspiration at the top of DESE or the school board for a very long time. And so someone aspirational who is willing to go in, acknowledge hard truths, because I think that has been lacking here,
Yeah.
and then set out a serious, feasible vision for how to get to where we want to go.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately our kids graduate from our schools, but they go out into the world. They don't just stay in Missouri, right? So I think that the idea that we can just do things how Missouri's always done things and not worry about what other states are doing, is something that needs to be put aside, my opinion.
Yeah, and just beyond that, I mean, the test data are kind of overwhelming that our kids just aren't learning as much anymore. And if we were a business, we'd say, look, we can't keep running our business like this. This is not working, and we would change. So we need to have that mentality here as well.
Well, one thing that's been floated, I guess, the last several legislative sessions, at least four or five, often by the same person, is an idea that many states have. It's kind of a gateway to letting kids pick any public or private school, but letting kids pick any public school they want to within their district or outside of their district, which is called interdistrict choice or open enrollment. That has come up routinely in Missouri. We have not done it. Kansas, our neighbor, has done it aggressively, Oklahoma as well. And there are folks in the state or in groups in the state that are like, this is our one and only issue. This is the one thing we want more than we want anything else is for kids to be able to pick any public school. Um, there's pushback on that from superintendents, people within the system, like we won't be able to manage the kids moving all over the place, the money moving all over the place. Schools will have to, or districts will have to close the small rural ones, and it's going to cause just major upheaval if we allow open enrollment. Finally, you've just written a paper on this, and I want to talk about that for a minute. What say you to that claim?
Yeah, so this all started when I was giving testimony down in Jefferson City on, as you mentioned, open enrollment comes up at least
All the time.
recently every legislative session, and this session was a little quiet because the legislators were focused on the letter grades and literacy. But in prior sessions, it's been quite prominent, and then the testimony against open enrollment is the first order thing that they're talking about is the disruption this is going to cause, both in terms of just operations, like how are we going to handle this huge influx of kids, and then finances. And, my initial reaction when I was listening to this testimony was, doesn't sound like that would happen so extreme as they were implying. And then I went and looked, and there's really not much evidence on it. And so we collected data from 5 states that have implemented open enrollment policies. We picked the states to kind of be informative about Missouri, be kind of nearby, but then also they have different levels of the policy. So some states have very expansive open enrollment policies, like you mentioned, Oklahoma. Some states are pretty restrictive, like the districts don't have to participate. They can exclude kids for whatever reason they want. So there's a whole range of these programs. And so we pulled together 5 states that differ on dimensions that allow us to see some of this stuff. And we just look to see what happened to enrollment across districts when open enrollment was implemented. And we looked 5 years forward. You could, in theory, you could look even further, but as you get further and further away from when this happened, other things are happening too, and it gets
Sure.
harder to tie it to open enrollment. But basically, I thought the claims I was hearing in testimony were probably overstated, but I was a little shocked at how little we found. And so, really, there's really no evidence of any disruption caused within the first 5 years that you can see statistically. So one thing to keep in mind is school districts experience enrollment fluctuations every year for all kinds of reasons, right? This
Sure.
stuff's moving up and down. People are moving around. There's a big group of 10-year-olds in an area for whatever reason. All these kind of things are happening all the time. When open enrollment happens, you can't really see anything changing beyond the normal fluctuations that districts experience already. So it just and it was, like I said, the result was a little stronger than I thought it would be in the sense of just nothing being there. But it really made me think that this whole disruption thing is a non starter.
Yeah, I often hear like, what about the buses? And we're going to be driving these kids all over the place. And there is this idea that there's going to be just like a magnet from the low performing schools, the poor schools, to the high performing, the wealthy schools. And all these kids are going to be coming in, which has never even been part of the legislation. It's always been if you have an open seat, and districts can say how many open seats they have, at what grade, in what schools, and parents can apply to have their child get that open seat, but there's never been like, just it's gonna be, completely open and people are gonna be crossing all over the place. That is true in some places like New Orleans, 100% charter school. There are districts where kids aren't zoned at all, and it seems to function, I guess I would say. But that I don't know, like, the doomsday scenario and the rurals especially claiming that they're gonna have to close. Did you look at you did look at school closings too, right?
Yes, with the school and district closings, and then there's really nothing happening there.
Yeah,
Those just aren't very common events. They aren't very common before open enrollment is implemented, and they aren't very common after.
right. Although we have some tiny school districts in Missouri, but, so where do you stand now? Like, if someone pushes for it, it's not gonna bother you because it doesn't really do anything?
Well, I think I want to back up and talk a little bit about our finding about something you
Yes,
briefly.
please, please do.
There's like two extremes of this, right? The people who are most against open enrollment either are in the camp of essentially, I am a taxpayer in a wealthy district, and our district is great, and everyone's going to come overwhelm us as soon as this is allowed, and that'll be terrible. And there's just no basis for that because, as you indicated, every one of these policies, no well-designed policy would allow that to happen. That's ridiculous. It's always if you have capacity, the local, people who live there get first priority. So that the policy just built for that not to happen. I also think it's true that the people living in these areas with the best schools, I don't know, this is not the best way to say, they overvalue them by the fact that they live there,
Absolutely.
right? They're
Yes.
they're all wound up about school quality. It doesn't mean everyone else who lives everywhere is just dying to beat down their door and get into their school. They don't care as much, right? And on the flip side, you have these poor, these low performing schools are going to get bottomed out and emptied out and have to close down, and everyone's going to leave. There's also a lot of evidence there's not a lot of leaving out of those districts anyway. I mean, my bigger issue with that is what exactly are you holding on to here? You're a big believer in a terrible school just should be able to exist forever. I don't understand that. But even ignoring my personal view that it's not so bad if a terrible district closes, people just are not fleeing in mass. The people who really want to go to better schools, the system's imperfect, but they already aren't living by the really bad schools. There's ways they can get around that. So there's just not this push and pull so strongly on the sides like people imagine. So I think you asked where I was at on open enrollment. So my view is in principle it's a good policy that there's, in states that have it, like a there's a few states where maybe a little over 10% of kids participate. In most states, it's like mid single digits that have these good programs, like 7, 8% of kids. That's a decent amount of kids. Like that's a nice feature that they should be able to choose their school if they want to, and if there's space, and that's a great thing. But our paper really shows it doesn't do much harm.
Yeah.
So the school system can handle it. So why not do it? I will say, proponents of school choice are open enrollment, excuse me. There's a little bit of a, double-edged sword here where it doesn't look like it's this like market shifting mechanism that just upends the school system and we get this super efficient market because most people do stay local and
Yeah.
just go to their local school.
Yeah.
And so, it kind of dulls my enthusiasm for it, if you want to say it that way. It's not the first thing I would want to do to make our school system more efficient from a market perspective. But, it's a nice policy. We should have it and
Yeah.
it's not causing harm.
I think all the conversation around it, and like not this year, but the year before, last legislative session in 2025, some of the lower performing districts were like, okay, if I vote for this, we have to carve out my district so kids can't leave, which is absurd, right? Like because we're low performing, the kids will want to leave. And so carve out the low performers and lock the door, make sure the kids have to stay, which is crazy. But I think it's created a general disdain for the idea of it that you can pick a public school and not be assigned to a public school because you and I have also worked on this issue of by law, if a school is designated as persistently dangerous, kids are supposed to be able to leave. Now, Missouri doesn't identify any persistently dangerous schools, but federal law says if the school is persistently dangerous by definition, kids are allowed to leave. And also, in many states that have letter grades or some other system that works, kids in the lowest performing schools are allowed to leave. If you go to an F school, they can't make you stay at an F school. You can pick another public school. So my concern is that in Missouri, there's just such a strong distaste for the idea of public school open enrollment that we're not even considering it in those extreme cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And it kind of boggles my mind because I don't think anyone's like anti-kid. If
No,
you found
I don't
some
either.
kid and said, "Look, your school is really dangerous. I'm gonna, find you and you're gonna go to that school. I'm gonna make you." But somehow they talk themselves into it. They kind of fall into this being an okay policy because they're worried about, the school itself or the adults. And, for me, it's just like, look, these kids, this is it for them. The kids in our schools today, this is their shot. This is what we can fix our schools, make them better tomorrow. But for the kids today, this is what they have. And why are we trapping them in terrible options? And they may choose terrible options. And I think that's a harder thing. And if they wanna do that, kind of feel like we have to let them, but if families want to choose something better, why aren't we helping them do that when we have the space, which there is plenty of slack and the system's inefficient in this regard, right? There can be open seats at a better school and you have these kids who wanna go there, why not fill those open seats and make for a more efficient system?
I mean, Minnesota in 1989 said you can go to any public school. I don't think they're known for it. I don't think people think, "Wow, I gotta get to Minnesota, I can pick any public school." The idea was just like you pay your property taxes to a public school district, but your child can attend any public school. They did not see massive movement. I think if I remember this correctly, in the early days, parents of children with IEPs often will shop around for what they believe to be the best school that can serve that IEP. And parents on low performing schools tried to move to higher performing. But, the I think Minnesota is just people who are born and grew up in Minnesota are just used to this idea. But in Missouri, it just seems so foreign that folks just have a hard time accepting. What about the money? I mean, you didn't even talk about the money in your paper, but immediately people are like, "What about the money? How will that ever work if I'm paying my property taxes to have my kids in this school and somebody comes along who didn't pay the property taxes, they can't go there?" I just find that to
Yeah,
be
I mean,
frustrating.
we were gonna talk about the money. The reason we didn't end up talking about the money much is the money through an open enrollment flows through the kids, and there just wasn't
The kids
there
aren't
weren't big
moving.
changes in
Yeah.
enrollment, so that it's not gonna change the money.
So, theoretically, when it comes to school choice, kids have the option of virtual, open and public school, open enrollment, private school choice through scholarships usually, and charter schools. What's next for you? I mean, if open enrollment is sort of a meh, we have an ESA program that's just sort of seems to be growing in its own way, right? We're up
Yeah,
to 10 to
yeah, I mean,
15,000
and the
kids.
federal tax credit is what's really gonna give
Could
that a shot.
potentially explode it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We're at like 10 to 15,000 kids, I think. Um, 1 to 2%, something like that. And but charter schools, we have gotten nowhere in Missouri. As
Almost nowhere.
others, what's that?
Almost nowhere. We haven't been in Boone County yet.
Almost nowhere. I mean, honestly, nowhere from 25 years ago when the law passed. It was Kansas City and St. Louis. It's still pretty much Kansas City and St. Louis. Now we got Boone County, one school, but that's it's something. But what do you think can be done to convince Missourians that charter schools are something that every family should be able to at least be able to pick if they want to?
Yeah, so I feel like this is the biggest missed opportunity in Missouri right now. I say that partly because we have good evidence from like a national studies of charter school effectiveness that our charter schools are effective in the sense that kids learn more during the year in our charter schools than if they go to the traditional public schools. They work. There's a lot of people who are against school choice fundamentally because of public dollars going to private providers, and I'm not in that camp, but I understand the argument. That's not an argument for against charter schools. Charter schools are public schools. Like like, why not have this higher quality option that is also a public school and has to take everyone who applies? Why not have that option available for families where their zoned public school is not effective? It's just really hard for me to understand.
And tell me why not. What do you get from folks? I mean, because I've been in these committee hearings too, and the stuff I hear is like what you just said. They're not public schools. They can turn kids away. They don't have to take kids with special needs.
Well,
It's just
in here in Columbia where, we have the new charter school and hopefully we'll get some more, the public school district is fighting really hard against it. And, their argument is very vague. It, it's something essentially to the extent that they say the charter school is going to take money away from the public schools and we won't be from the traditional public school district and we won't be able to educate children effectively anymore. I mean, it doesn't make any sense because the charter school is educating those kids. And, if the charter school is no good, no one has to sign up. No one gets forced to go there.
right.
So if the traditional public school district is doing such a great job, no one will go to the charter school. It's no big deal. So the whole thing gets kind of circular and doesn't make much sense to me. But it is kind of effective. There's a lot of people that quickly get in the circle the wagons mentality, and that's the outsider enemy, and we can't have it. So there's certainly that sentiment around town here.
Yeah, and this similarly, they're not ubiquitous everywhere, but there are many states where you know Uh, show me. So we had an employee from Minnesota. She's like, "Well, what do you mean you don't pick your school?" Because she just grew up in a state where charter schools had been around throughout the state. And I think half of all charter schools are sponsored by local school boards. Some states, the state education agency, like Texas, charters all the charter schools. I mean, it's not an enemy to keep out. It's a portfolio approach, and they're not they're just not seen as the bad guy in a way that they are in Missouri. What do you have a plan for, like, to help people understand why charter schools can be a good option? Where do you think we go? I mean, what do we do? Do you go to the state board? Do you go to the legislature? Do you go to local school boards? Like, I know I've had people reach out to me throughout the state to say, "How why don't we have charter schools? I'd love a classical charter school in Joplin." And I'm like, "You gotta start working on your local folks then, you know?"
Yeah, the resistance of our local school boards to charter schools is very strong and consistent. Like
Yep.
as you mentioned, nationally, a lot of public school districts sponsor charter schools
Sure.
and approve them. Now, I will say in places like California, I know they have that model, and a lot of charter schools opened in cities when enrollment was growing, and then enrollment started falling, and now the circle the wagons mentality comes back in, and the public school district says, "Oh no, no more charters. We can't let you take in our students." So I do think those kind of pressures do come up other places. Um, in Missouri, maybe it's just kind of been a more like stable, steady pressure against. I mean, my view is that the inability of local school boards to operationalize this tells me that our state school board association, our state's what's it? What's the organization that approves the charter schools? What's it called?
The State Charter School Commission.
State Charter School Commission. Thank you.
Mhm.
They should be able to approve the charter statewide. Like, that's the solution to this.
I mean, and what we've talked about at Show Me Institute is if you go to your local school board and they say no, you can appeal it and have the State Charter School Commission. I mean, there would be like a step in the middle, like then they could do it. I think that's exactly right, and I think that that'd be a great model. We'll see if it ever happens. Well,
Yeah, but why doesn't it ever happen? It makes me think the fact that it's never happened, it makes me think that's not a truly viable path.
it's not right now. You can't do it.
Yeah.
It would have
Oh,
to. We'd have to change the law.
so you're saying you ask the local first.
Yes,
If they say no, then the state can step in. That's the law you want. That's how you want the law to change.
I think so because I think
Yeah.
the local school board would figure if we don't do it, they're gonna do it. You know what I mean? So maybe we want to control it. Because in a lot of places, the local school board wants to have a handle in it, right? They are the sponsor. Um, they review the performance every few years, and they have some control, and that's why I think they do it. But in this case, it would essentially be very similar to going straight to the commission. But you'd say, "We'll go to the local school board first and give them the option. If they say no, then we'll go to the commission." And the state charter school commission doesn't approve every charter school either; they turn them down. So
No,
you know,
it's hard to get approved.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And they've learned over the last 3 decades that you need to start strong to stay strong. Like, there's no more, like, get a storefront and 15 kids and just be scrappy and make a go of it. They're not a high quality charter school. And Missouri, I should say, has had many charter schools close. And that, to me, kinda proves the model. So, if you're not performing well, you close. But, yeah, all right. Well, we're gonna probably have to come back and talk about this some more, this charter school conundrum in Missouri. But for now, open enrollment, we don't need to sweat it, and we'll just cross our fingers for 2027's legislative session.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey.
Yep. Thanks for having me.